The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room grew quiet. Representative Jasmine Crockett stood steadily at the microphone, a set of documents arranged neatly in front of her. For months, Senator Ted Cruz had dominated these hearings with dismissive comments and a condescending attitude, especially toward newer representatives. But today was not one of those days. Cruz leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk forming as Crockett began discussing constitutional interpretation. He laughed under his breath and whispered something to a colleague, drawing scattered amusement from his side of the room. Crockett stopped, looked directly at Cruz, and lifted a document from her folder. Senator Cruz, before you continue laughing, you may want to revisit your own remarks from 2014. I have them here, and what I'm about to share will make clear who actually understands constitutional law. Cruz's smirk faded as Crockett raised the paper. What unfolded over the next half-minute didn't just quiet him. It exposed something that would permanently alter the committee's dynamic. If you value honesty in government, remember to like this video and subscribe for more moments where facts rise above politics. Purpose: provide deeper context for older viewers. Before this notable exchange, both figures had taken very different paths to reaching this committee room. Representative Jasmine Crockett had earned a strong reputation built on principle and discipline. As a civil rights lawyer for more than 15 years before entering politics, she represented people whose constitutional rights had been violated. She never sought attention, gaining respect instead through detailed legal work and community involvement. Her election to Congress followed years of engaging directly with the justice system and seeing both its strengths and limitations. "I didn't come to Congress to play political games," she said during her campaign. "I came to ensure the Constitution protects all Americans, not just the privileged few." Her legal knowledge was not theoretical. Crockett had handled over 100 civil rights cases and won important decisions that strengthened voting rights and reformed criminal justice policies in her state. Even colleagues across the aisle acknowledged her careful preparation and strong grasp of constitutional law. Senator Ted Cruz, on the other hand, cultivated a contrasting profile. With degrees from Princeton and Harvard Law, his resume was notable. As a former Solicitor General of Texas, he argued 9 cases before the Supreme Court. He rose quickly in national politics, known for sharp debate skills and firmly conservative views. Over time, however, Cruz increasingly relied on performative politics instead of substantive debate. His committee appearances often resulted in viral clips showing him dismissing testimony or interrupting colleagues, especially women and lawmakers of color. His questioning style shifted from investigative to condescending. "The committee should be a place for serious constitutional discussion," noted former Senator Richard Elton. But lately, it has felt more like a stage for political showmanship. The issue before the committee that day centered on interpretations of the 14th Amendment, a subject both Cruz and Crockett understood well, though from notably different viewpoints. In the weeks before the hearing, Cruz made several TV appearances questioning Crockett's constitutional knowledge. "Some representatives need a refresher course in law school," he remarked on a popular news show. The comment spread widely online. What Cruz didn't realize was that Crockett had thoroughly reviewed his past statements on the 14th Amendment. She compiled a detailed file showing how his interpretations shifted depending on the political result he preferred. As the hearing approached, staffers noticed Crockett's unusual level of preparation, requesting historical documents and legal opinions that were rarely cited in these sessions. Representative Crockett wasn't seeking a confrontation, her chief of staff later said. She was simply tired of watching constitutional standards bent for political advantage. She brought facts, not theatrics. The hearing room was filled that Wednesday morning. The topic, federal authority over election practices, had drawn intense interest from all political sides. News cameras lined the back, and attendees whispered as members took their seats. Chairman Bennett called the session to order, his gavel echoing across the room. "We continue our review of federal election oversight," he announced. "Representative Crockett, you have 7 minutes." Crockett spoke calmly. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to discuss the constitutional basis for federal election protections." She explained how the 14th Amendment granted Congress authority to ensure equal voting rights. Her explanation was clear and supported by founding documents and recent Supreme Court rulings. Across the room, Cruz's posture made his skepticism obvious. He leaned to a colleague, whispered again, and laughed loud enough for microphones to catch it. Crockett paused. "I see Senator Cruz finds constitutional jurisprudence entertaining. Perhaps that explains the inconsistencies in his own statements. Cruz sat up. If the representative is going to make accusations. These aren't accusations, Senator. These are documented facts, Crockett replied, lifting the first document. On March 12, 2014, you argued before the Supreme Court that federal oversight of state election processes was, quote, a necessary protection of constitutional rights when states show patterns of unequal application. She held up Cruz's own transcript. But just last month on the National Policy Forum, you called federal election oversight an unconstitutional power grab. The room grew still. Cruz adjusted his tie, his earlier amusement replaced by visible tension. This is not about politics, Senator, Crockett continued. It is about applying constitutional principles consistently. When you challenged voting restrictions in the past, you supported federal oversight. Now that the circumstances have changed, your reasoning has completely reversed. Cruz leaned toward his microphone. The representative is oversimplifying complex legal arguments. Context matters in constitutional law. I fully agree. Context does matter, Crockett replied, presenting another document. Which is why I compiled every statement you've made on federal election authority from 2008 to now, with full context included. What stands out is not legal nuance, Senator, but that your constitutional interpretation changes exactly when it benefits a different political outcome. She passed copies around. The timeline displayed a clear trend. Cruz supported broad federal power when Democratic states were involved but opposed it when Republican-led states faced similar issues. The Constitution is not a political tool, Senator Cruz, Crockett stated, steady but not aggressive. It forms the basis of our democracy. Its meaning cannot shift depending on which party gains advantage. Cruz tried to interrupt. The representative is drawing a false comparison. I'll yield when I finish, Senator, Crockett said evenly. Committee rules permit me to complete my statement. She moved to her third document. Statements Cruz made during his own campaign. In 2018, you praised federal intervention, saying it ensured constitutional protections applied equally across all states. Yet when similar protections were proposed for minority communities last year, you called them unconstitutional. The room was silent. Even Cruz's allies exchanged uneasy looks. Crockett continued laying out her argument, connecting Cruz's contradictory remarks to core constitutional principles. For every point, she referenced relevant case law and constitutional sections, showing how established doctrine had been selectively used. The Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment does not change based on which voters are affected, she explained, displaying slides comparing similar cases where Cruz took opposing stances. Either we believe in equal application of constitutional standards or we allow political preferences to dictate legal interpretations. Several members took heavy notes. Some reviewed the documents against their own records. Cruz's expression shifted from confident dismissal to rigid defensiveness. When he attempted to interrupt again, the chairman stepped in. The representative has the floor. Senator Cruz, you'll have time for response. Crockett addressed the current legislation directly. The bill before us does not create new constitutional powers. It simply enforces protections the Supreme Court has already acknowledged. Protections Senator Cruz himself supported when they aligned with his goals. She ended by addressing Cruz directly. Senator, I do not question your legal training. What concerns me is the selective use of it when political advantage is at stake. Americans deserve consistent constitutional principles, not shifting interpretations. As she finished, Cruz prepared his rebuttal. The smirk was gone. His expression tightened. The chairman recognized him. Senator Cruz, you have 5 minutes. Cruz leaned forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While I appreciate Representative Crockett's dramatic presentation, she misunderstands the complexity of constitutional law. But as he attempted to explain the contradictions, Crockett placed another document in front of him, a legal brief he had written that contradicted the very argument he was making. When his eyes met the paper, he stopped mid-sentence. The chairman asked, Senator, would you like to continue? The pivotal moment came when Cruz tried to dismiss Crockett's evidence as selective quotes. He spoke confidently at first, but his usual rhetorical style lacked its typical sharpness. What Representative Crockett fails to recognize, Cruz said, is that constitutional interpretation requires detailed legal analysis that adjusts to circumstances. Different cases naturally lead to different applications. That was when Crockett revealed her strongest evidence. She calmly slid a document toward the committee chairman, who reviewed it briefly before distributing copies to the other members. "Senator Cruz," Crockett said as she stood again, even though it was formally Cruz's turn to speak. "This is your own amicus brief from the 2016 Jensen v. Missouri case. In it, you wrote, and I'll quote, 'Constitutional principles cannot be applied selectively based on political results. The 14th Amendment's protections must remain consistent regardless of which party controls a state legislature.'" The room fell completely silent. Cruz stared at the paper as recognition settled in. These weren't campaign statements or interviews he could dismiss as routine political talk. This was his published legal work, written in his role as a constitutional attorney. "Furthermore," Crockett continued, "you specifically criticized what you called outcome-driven constitutional interpretation as the greatest threat to the rule of law. Yet your positions over the past 3 years reflect exactly that." Cruz's face reddened. He shuffled through his notes, looking for a response that wouldn't weaken his stance even more. For perhaps the first time in his Senate career, Ted Cruz appeared genuinely unsure how to reply. Representative Malcolm Harris, a moderate Republican, cleared his throat. "Mr. Chairman, I request that Representative Crockett's evidence be added to the official committee record. These documents raise serious questions about consistent constitutional interpretation." The chairman agreed. This unexpected bipartisan support marked a turning point. Cruz glanced at his Republican colleagues, several of whom were now examining Crockett's documents with thoughtful expressions rather than brushing them off. "Trying to regain footing," Cruz said. "My colleague is mixing unrelated legal contexts." "The legal context," Senator Crockett replied with calm authority, "is the United States Constitution. Its meaning doesn't shift based on political convenience." The room erupted in murmurs. A senior Democratic senator leaned forward. "Mr. Chairman, something important just occurred. Representative Crockett has shown that constitutional standards are being unevenly applied for partisan benefit. This raises fundamental concerns about our committee's integrity." Reporters in the press gallery scrambled to take notes. Veteran journalist Elaine Winters would later write, "In 3 decades of covering Congress, I've rarely seen a member confronted so effectively with their own published work." Cruz's allies tried to distract the room with procedural complaints, but it was clear the momentum had changed. The citations were precise, well-supported, and impossible to dismiss as partisan rhetoric. As questioning continued, members began directing their inquiries toward Crockett rather than the more senior representatives, recognizing her command of constitutional law. 3 Republican senators even shifted their tone, stressing the importance of applying constitutional principles consistently, echoing the wording from Cruz's own brief that Crockett had highlighted. Cruz himself backed away from some of his stronger claims, stating that he had always supported consistency in constitutional interpretation, despite the contradictory evidence. His usual confidence was noticeably reduced. The chairman extended the hearing by an additional 30 minutes due to the importance of the issues raised. During this extra time, Crockett clearly outlined how the proposed legislation aligned with established constitutional precedent, including positions Cruz had supported in the past. As the hearing concluded, several committee members approached Crockett to shake her hand, including 2 Republicans who had previously agreed with Cruz. Observers in the gallery, many of whom had grown used to political performance overshadowing real policy debate, broke into spontaneous applause, something rarely seen in committee settings. Cruz quickly gathered his materials and exited through a side door to avoid the press. His staff canceled his scheduled media appearance, citing timing issues. Crockett remained to answer questions. When reporters asked whether she had planned this confrontation, she simply said, "I came prepared to defend the Constitution as written, not adjusted for political purposes." That is the oath every one of us took. Within an hour, clips of the exchange were circulating widely online. Constitutional law scholars from across the political spectrum weighed in, many agreeing with Crockett's point about inconsistent constitutional interpretation. "What we saw," said Professor James Harrison of Georgetown Law, "was not just a political exchange, but a genuine debate about constitutional integrity." Representative Crockett forced attention on how arguments are often shaped by political goals rather than steady legal principles. By the evening, 3 major networks featured the hearing. The Capitol Journal headlined, "Freshman Representative Challenges Senate Veteran on Constitutional Consistency." The impact of the Cruz-Crockett exchange went far beyond the hearing. In the following days, there was a notable shift in how constitutional arguments were presented in Congress. Cruz's office released a statement claiming his views had been misunderstood and promised a detailed response that never fully materialized. More importantly, lawmakers reviewing pending bills with similar constitutional issues began prefacing their comments with explanations of how their positions aligned with prior interpretations, not just political preference. Analysts named this shift the Crockett effect. Staffers reported that members were now asking, "Does this match our previous constitutional stance?" before making public remarks. Media focus moved from the dramatic moment to the underlying issue. A national report titled Constitutional Convenience highlighted how politicians from both parties had reversed their constitutional arguments depending on political benefit. What Representative Crockett demonstrated, said constitutional scholar Dr. Elena Richardson, is something legal scholars have long noted but rarely see acknowledged in public. The Constitution is increasingly treated as a political instrument, instead of a guiding framework meant to remain consistent regardless of who holds power. Crockett's national visibility grew. Interview requests poured in, but she accepted only those centered on constitutional principles. On the program Constitutional Perspectives, she explained, "This isn't Republican versus Democrat. It's about whether we believe in the Constitution or whether we use it as a tool to justify political outcomes. When arguments shift depending on who benefits, we undermine the foundation of our system." Her message resonated with Americans across the spectrum, including conservatives who valued consistency. Letters of support came from citizens who appreciated her commitment to principle. Cruz's tone toward constitutional debates also shifted. In later hearings, he emphasized consistent legal reasoning and avoided the dismissive approach he once used. While he never explicitly referenced the confrontation, his conduct showed its effect. The incident quickly became a case study in law schools. Professor Martin Friedman of Yale Law School even created a seminar titled Constitutional Consistency and Political Discourse centered on the Cruz-Crockett exchange. "This moment," he said, "illustrates how political objectives can distort constitutional interpretation." Representative Crockett offered a clear example of constitutional discipline. 6 months later, during debate on another controversial bill, Senator Maxwell Roberts, a conservative ally of Cruz, surprised many by saying, "Although this bill supports my policy views, it conflicts with the constitutional position I defended last year. Consistency requires me to reassess." This unusual honesty received bipartisan praise and was tied directly to the standards Crockett had elevated. Commentators began referring to the Crockett test. Would your constitutional position remain the same no matter which party benefits? For Crockett, the hearing was not a personal win but a renewed dedication to constitutional principles. "The Constitution's value," she said at her alma mater, "comes from its consistent application, not its flexibility in moments of political need." A year later, a compilation of significant congressional exchanges included the Cruz-Crockett moment among the top 5 that reshaped congressional debate. The analysis noted that the exchange was historic not because a junior member challenged a senior senator, but because it shifted the discussion from political drama to real constitutional analysis. Though Cruz and Crockett continued to disagree in later hearings, their exchanges became more focused and substantive. The dismissive tone was replaced by genuine engagement with constitutional arguments. In a political era often defined by performance, wrote political historian Dr. James Montgomery, the Cruz-Crockett confrontation shows that preparation, knowledge, and consistent principles can still bring us back to meaningful democratic debate. A retired federal judge who watched both the exchange and its aftermath summed it up. Representative Crockett reminded everyone, from lawmakers to citizens, that the Constitution is not a tool for political advantage, but a trust to be interpreted with consistency and integrity. What began with a dismissive laugh and ended with a constitutional reckoning continues to influence congressional debates today. It serves as a reminder that a system built on constitutional principles requires consistent application for those principles to retain legitimacy. If you found this exploration valuable, please like the video, subscribe, and share it with those who care about principled political discussion. An informed public is essential to preserving our constitutional democracy.